So welcome to this third class on the Heart Sutra, and let's go ahead and recite the Heart Sutra together. I realize that I'm the only one that you're hearing, but all of you who are participating can put that in front of you. Again, the text that we're using, this version by Venerable George Chernoff that he translated. And so we'll do that now, trying to make this a reflection on emptiness to the best of your ability. Thus did I hear at one time the Bhagawan was dwelling on Massa Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagawan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharadvatiputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared: Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Soha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagawan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagawan having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagawan. And let's recite the refuge first 3 times together. We'll do this once in English and then twice in the Tibetan, and then we'll do a short meditation. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyamsu chi daki chunyan gipe sonam gi drola penchir sangye drupar shok sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyamsu chi Daki Chanyan Gipe Sonam Gi Drola Penchir Sangye Drupar Sho. All right, let's do a short meditation. Just give ourselves a chance to focus the mind a bit. And then after a few minutes of focused meditation on the breath, I'll lead you in a short reflection to set our motivation for engaging in this session today. So again, just choose whatever way to work with the breath that's familiar with you or for you, and that you find useful for your mind. And then just do that, keeping the awareness on the breath as best as you can. Whenever the mind wanders, bring the mind back to the breath. And now let's set our motivation. We can recall from the Buddha's teachings that the fundamental root of all of our suffering is this ignorance that is grasping at things as if they existed from their own side, as if they were self-established, self-existent. Yeah, and this is a problem we have had since beginningless time. This ignorance has been in our minds without any causes other than the previous moment of ignorance. But that doesn't mean that this ignorance is something we can't remove. This ignorance is not innate to the mind, rather, it is adventitious. meaning that through the force of wisdom, we can overcome that ignorance. As we study the Heart Sutra, it's important to acknowledge that this isn't a futile effort in the least. The degree to which we are able to strengthen our wisdom is the degree to which the ignorance will be less prevalent in our lives, and eventually we can begin the process of overcoming that ignorance through having a direct realization of emptiness, through having this very profound wisdom. We can begin to remove layer by layer the ignorance that we have had since beginningless time, as well as all of the delusions that are supported on that, as well as dismantling all of the contaminated karma we've created on the basis of that, which then will lead to an end to our suffering, and moreover, to our attainment of the state of enlightenment. But we have to generate the motivation of bodhicitta in order to accomplish that full goal. We have to open our eyes to the reality that all beings have been together with ignorance since beginningless time as well, but that all beings have Buddha nature, have the potential to be free from that because their ignorance is also not innate to their minds or inherent to their minds. Rather, their ignorance is only there adventitiously. So as we set upon this study again today, let's recall that motivation of bodhicitta, really strongly wanting to become free from all of your own suffering and all of your own obscurations, but solely as a means to be able to accomplish the welfare of all sentient beings, to be able to lead them all to enlightenment and to be free from all suffering. And just make that your strong motivation for engaging in this study today. And then we'll begin. Okay. So let me go ahead and share the slides for just to get back into what we're doing. This is our third class. We'll be just briefly reviewing what we've looked at already. We haven't done too much in terms of, we just mostly gone through the preparatory parts of the text. Again, it might be good for you to have the text in front of you, which again is the not just the Heart Sutra, but also the commentary on the Heart Sutra that we're using by Tendar Larampa, because we will be going through that momentarily. So we saw that in that commentary, there were the verses of homage, and we went through those rather quickly because there wasn't really too much to say on that. The explanation of the meaning of the text was divided into two parts, the general meaning and the meaning of the parts. In the general meaning, we went through these various points that are raised, and as I said, there was a whole lot of that I just didn't really feel we needed to go into in great detail in this course. You can read it on your own, but it goes into who is the speaker of this text, the sutra, and what is the nature of his speech. So again, this is pretty self-explanatory, but we went into some of the discussion about what the different tenet systems say the Buddha's speech is, but again, it's not so important to what we're doing here. From what do the sutras arise? And that again was just a very brief point that was on page 4 of the text. They arise from the mouth of the Buddha as well as from other persons due to the power of his blessing. And we talked about that a little bit later. I'll show that slide again shortly about the various ways that sutras can be taught, not just directly from the mouth of the Buddha, but also from others who have his blessing and so on. And then where they were taught, this is Vulture's Peak, which we will see again coming up in the sutra, or Massive Vulture's Mountain, as it's called, I think, in our translation. And then when they were taught. Again, there's a lot of debate on that. No real settled answer in regard to when this sutra was taught, or the Perfection of Wisdom sutras in general. But nonetheless, that's not maybe again quite as relevant as the importance of studying the text itself. So in terms of the meaning of the parts, we had the preliminary stanzas, which go into kind of the setting for this, and then we'll get into the actual sutra, and we'll be doing that today. So we did have this that we used last time. Oops, how did I? Oops, now back to this. I'm trying to get this to appear. Let's see. Yeah, I think I brought it down here. There we go. At least for me, it's kind of out of the way a little bit. So let's go ahead and read this together. Again, you can each read this on your own. I bow down to the mother of the conquerors of the three times, the perfection of wisdom, inexpressible by words or thoughts, which is unproduced and unceased, like the entity of the sky, the object of wisdom, of unique knowledge. So again, this is a praise that is at the very beginning of the commentary as well. I think it's around page 9. Let's see. Yeah, right towards the end of page 9. So let's go through the remaining things that we covered last week just very briefly. The meaning of the title is the first part of the discourse on the actual sutra, and then the meaning of the text. All right. The text is the Heart Sutra is called in the Sanskrit the Bhagavati Prajnaparamita Hridaya, and so Bhagavati again is the female Bhagawan or Buddha. We could translate it literally as the Sacred Mother. In this context, it refers to the realization of emptiness in the mind of a Buddha. Not that it doesn't also refer to the realization of emptiness in the mind of a bodhisattva, but in its resultant state, this is what we mean. And we're going to see that in a moment in terms of the resultant perfection of wisdom. Prajna paramita, prajna's wisdom. Perfection is paramita, which literally means gone to the other shore. Hridaya is the heart or essence. So this is the heart or essence of the perfection of wisdom, the Sacred Mother. Again, mother because it gives birth to all of the Buddhas of the past, present, and future, and certainly also gives rise or birth to all of those who realize emptiness directly. So we saw that then the perfection of wisdom, again, this is just taking that category of the perfection of wisdom and saying, well, are there divisions of it? We can say there are 4 nominal divisions. Again, just nominal because not every one of these is an actual perfection of wisdom. In fact, it's really just the first one that is called the full, actual, fully qualified perfection of wisdom because it's the wisdom that's in the omniscient mind of a Buddha. That's the resultant perfection of wisdom. The path perfection of wisdom is the cause of that, which is the wisdom realizing emptiness in the continuum of a bodhisattva. So we could say again that this text includes addressing that because this is the path perfection of wisdom that of a bodhisattva that will lead to their attainment of the state of Buddhahood and thereby have a resultant perfection of wisdom. The text itself that we're studying is the scriptural perfection of wisdom. And of course, it's not an actual perfection of wisdom because it's not a consciousness. And then finally, the natural perfection of wisdom is just a term that's used to refer to emptiness itself, which is the natural state of all things that exist. So these 4, again, are just to know the different categorizations that we might, or contexts that we might use perfection of wisdom, prajnaparamita, but really it's just the first one that is the fully qualified actual prajnaparamita. In terms of Buddhist speech, we looked at this one little quote and said, it's that which is uttered by an Arya Buddha, its author, for the purpose of removing unfavorable conditions of disciples. And there are 3 divisions. So if we look at, again, what we are studying, we can see that it falls into potentially even 2 of these divisions, maybe even 3. I guess probably all 3, because the Buddha does speak words towards the very end of this text, doesn't say much, but nonetheless says enough to know that he fully approves of what has been said. So we have first the words spoken by the Buddha himself, which a lot of the sutras do contain, obviously. And we'll see that again at the very end when the Buddha arises from his meditation and speaks the words to Avalokiteshvara about what he has said. Then words spoken with the permission of the Buddha, which is actually the very introductory part that we're going to look at, which is where Ananda or Vajrapani, whoever it is that is saying, thus have I heard, all of that is kind of with the permission of the Buddha. And then the dialogue between Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara that we're going to look at is the words that originated from the Buddha's blessing. And we'll see that when we go through the text today, because we'll probably get into that part in today's lecture. So now we go on to the meaning of the text. That was the meaning of the title, just looking at some of the subjects around the title of the Prajnaparamita and so on. We're going to first have a discussion of the prologue that produces the sutra, because it's through the prologue that then the sutra is induced, that the dialogue occurs between Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara. Then a discussion of the actual sutra that is produced from that prologue. And this will be where we get into perhaps a little bit of this today, and we'll be continuing with that through the end of the course. So in terms of the prologue, again, this starts in terms of your text on page 11. So if you have that in front of you, and the commentary by Tendar Larampa, we'll go through that. And essentially the common prologue starts in the sutra with where it says, "Thus did I hear at one time," and that continues through a community of bodhisattvas. So it kind of gives the context for where this took place, when it took place, and so on. We'll look at that in just a moment. That next little part that says, "At that time, the Bhagawan," and talks also about Avalokiteshvara, what he's doing, that whole part is an uncommon or unique prologue. So the difference between these two is that the very first part would be very common with other sutras, particularly other Prajnaparamita sutras, in terms of where it was taught and what was going on. So that's just giving a general context of where this took place. But then the uncommon prologue, or unique prologue, is unique to this sutra because it's a specific occurrence that was happening in terms of the Buddha being in this meditative equipoise, and the Avalokiteshvara also coming to recognize the profound perfection of wisdom. So let's stop the share for right there. Any questions on kind of what we covered last time or where we are going today? Because we're going to start with this common prologue and then the uncommon one, and then we'll go more into the rest of the text. So, okay.
Sorry, Don.
Yeah, Jennifer.
One question. Regarding the preliminary stanzas, I bow down to the mother of the conquerors, etc.
Right.
Is that only in the commentary, or do we see it in certain versions of the Heart Sutra itself? Because I've never seen that.
No, I don't really know for sure. I've never seen it in a version of it myself either, but nonetheless, it says there, yeah, regarding this preliminary stanza, in great monasteries such as Sera and Drepung, before reciting this sutra, it's customary to recite these verses of praise and obeisance. So I don't know. I had never seen it before other than in this commentary. So I agree with you. Yeah, it is a little unusual. I think it's nice if you can do it, and it's nice for us to do it as part of the class. But yeah, I don't know. I have not seen it before, so sorry, I can't answer that. Yeah.
No, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and go to page 11, and we'll go through this commentary together, and then I'll go back to the slides after I've talked a little bit about this. So it says, with respect to the first, this is again page 11, the first point there is the common prologue is from "Thus did I hear at one time" to "Great Assembly of Bodhisattvas." The purpose of the prologue is to have the listeners understand that the compiler, which would be Ananda, or if, again, some texts or some scholars say that it was Vajrapani who was appearing as a bodhisattva in the retinue of the Buddha, but nonetheless, whoever the compiler was, that they listened without adding anything or subtracting anything so that they can pay careful attention to him. According to the Master Haribhadra, "at one time" means that by the blessings of the Buddha, all the words of the sutra were heard by Ananda in one instant. He says this in his Abhisamaya Karaloka, the commentary on Maitreya's text. Abhisamaya is usually translated ornament for clear realizations. And it says, because an ear consciousness to which the entire meaning of the sutra arose in one instant. That's a line from his commentary, Haribhadra's commentary. So he's saying that it actually was something that Ananda heard in just a single instant. The Master Bhavaviveka, who is a later scholar, I believe, asserts that because the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras are not within the sphere of Shravakas, their compiler is Vajrapani. Haribhadra asserts that although Ananda was not capable of doing so himself, he compiled the sutras through the blessing of the Buddha, and thereby is the compiler of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. Although such things should be explained, an explanation would be too lengthy. So this is just, again, another part of this little debate about who was the compiler at the time. Um, Again, a lot of this we have to take for granted, that if Vajrapani and Avalokiteshvara and Manjushri and Siddhigarbha and the others that were known as the 8 bodhisattvas in the retinue of the Buddha, if they were actually Buddhas that were manifesting as bodhisattvas, then they appear to have bodhisattva characteristics. They don't appear to be fully enlightened. So they, would be still learning from the Buddha and trying to learn the perfection of wisdom and so on. But nonetheless, those who are not Buddhas at the time, or who are not even bodhisattvas, for example, Ananda wasn't even said to become a foe destroyer until much later. And so those who don't have the familiarity with the Mahayana would seem to be not as inclined to be able to hear and understand these words. But nonetheless, Haribhadra says, yeah, through the blessings of the Buddha, Asanga was able to do that. And it's not a huge point, but just to explain what's in the commentary. Then in terms of that had to do with kind of the time and what was going on, then the next one has to do, the next paragraph, with the place. The reason for saying both Rajagriha and Vulture Peak, or Maso Vulture's Mountain, is for the sake of indicating the combination of the two places for laymen and those who have gone forth from the world, with the former being the best among places in the afflicted class, and the latter being the best of places among the pure class. So again, it seems to be that there's Rajagriha for the layman and Vulture Peak for the pure class. And this is where all of these teachings took place at the Prajnaparamita. I showed a little picture of it last week in the slide, and it's not very large, and you can't imagine a great community of monks and bodhisattvas there because of the space. It would be limited. But they say that many bodhisattvas have this ability to just manifest in the sky or up above, so it's not that they're limited by space, but it seems to be a more pure or holy place. Remember, we said that it kind of has this diamond quality, this indestructible quality, and hungry ghosts can't pass through it, what have you. So again, it's a very special place. With regard to Rajagriha, the actual town that is down below Vulture Peak, which literally means the residence of the king, there's a little story. It says there was a famous place in the city of Kushinagara that became uninhabitable due to being repeatedly burned down by non-humans. Some sort of spirits kept burning the place down. So the king ordered that henceforth those whose homes burned down must build their homes in the charnel ground of Sitavana and remain there. At that time, by the power of karma, the king's palace was the first to be lost in a fire. So he made the decree that people would have to move to this charnel ground, and then his was the first place to be burned down, so he had to move. So he had to establish his residence there. So the king then went there and made his abode. That is how it got the name, Residence of the King, Rajagriha. So this is explained in the Shalistamba Sutra. So anyway, that's enough for that. I don't know that we need to discuss it much further. And then in terms of the retinue, the people who were there, regarding monk, the actuality of monkhood can be attained by any of the 10 ways of receiving ordination. I'm not going to go through all 10 of those because it's not quite so important. But in this context, it refers to an arhat, which is actually, they say, one way of receiving ordination is by attaining that state. So all of these are meant to be arhats that we're talking about here, who are very knowledgeable. Obviously, they've developed the perfection of wisdom to some degree, at least the wisdom realizing emptiness. They don't have the perfection of wisdom because they aren't bodhisattvas, because perfection of wisdom is referring specifically to the Mahayana realization of emptiness, especially that of a Buddha. But nonetheless, we saw the path perfection of wisdom is in the mind of a bodhisattva. The emptiness, the wisdom realizing emptiness in the mind of an arhat, however, isn't a perfection of wisdom, but nonetheless is a wisdom realizing emptiness. So as Shantideva says in the Bodhicharyavatara, this is chapter 9, verse 45, the first 2 lines, monkhood is the root of the teaching, but even monkhood is difficult. And I don't probably need to say too much on that. The Sangha, if we talk about what literally is a Sangha, it's a gathering of 4 or more monks, or fully ordained monks in particular. The etymology of the word Sangha is that which has the aspiration not to be separated by demons or maras from the teacher Buddha, the teaching of the excellent doctrine, the Dharma, and the friends who practice purity, the Sangha. So they themselves have that aspiration never to be separated by any kind of evil forces, any type of obstacles or hindrances from the three jewels, from the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And there's a verse quoted to support that. Chandrakirti's 70 stanzas on refuge says, because they cannot be separated from the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha by billions of demons, it is clearly called Sangha. So this is just giving, again, the idea of the retinue, of kind of who is all there. The next side, page 12, the next page, it says regarding the word great, because it said a great assembly or great community of of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. It's explained many times in the Indian commentaries that it means a large number. Again, pretty understandable. Bodhisattva is explained many times in such texts as the Vairocana Abhisam Bodhi and the Sanchaya Gata Prajna Paramita Sutra. The simple etymology is that because they have purified all faults and accomplished all good qualities, they are Bodhi, and because they contemplate the welfare of all transmigrators and have annihilated demons, they are sattvas. We're going to actually look at this in terms of the actual Tibetan in a moment. Bodhi often just is the root, again, that means Buddha, awaken, but Bodhi is meaning awakening, and sattva is sort of the heroic being intent on awakening. And it's similar in the Tibetan, but they do something a little different in regard to the first syllable. It's Jangchop Sempa. Or because they have studied the two truths again and again and have arrived at the meaning of them, they are called Bodhi. And because they have endured hardship in contemplating the two truths again and again, they are called Sattva. So again, the two truths, we're going to be touching on this throughout the text when we get into this initial part when Balakiteshvara says form is empty, emptiness is form, because it's really addressing the two truths, the two things that we have to be able to uphold in a final view of reality, that there is what's called conventional truth, which in the end we come to understand in a quite subtle way, and then there is ultimate truth, which is emptiness. The two truths in this highest system, again, the Prasangika, Madhyamika, the consequence middle way school, is a dichotomy that kind of all phenomena fit into one category or the other. Either they are conventional or they are ultimate. And these two are completely intertwined, and kind of there is nothing that for which there is kind of an emptiness that stands alone, or a phenomenon that is not emptiness that stands alone. The two always rise together because everything has its corresponding emptiness. A book has its emptiness, a chair has its emptiness, a person has their emptiness. As long as that phenomenon exists, the emptiness exists. We'll get into this when we get into the actual words of the sutra. So there's a quote here from a very long named sutra again that we saw earlier regarding great. The Sanchayagata Prajnaparamita Sutra says, those who abide in the supreme Mahayana of the conqueror have great giving, great awareness, and great power. They wear great armor and have tamed the deceiving demons. Therefore, they are called Mahasattvas. So there's going to be a little bit of a commentary on this that I'll share with you as well from Geshe Sonam Rinpoche's book. And then the final bit of this on the common prologue, and then we'll go to some slides, is the idea of the word together. So we said together with a great community of monks and so on. And that word sardam, here it means behavior or activity, and it means it's concordant. In brief, our author says it means that the audience was of concordant activity, meaning they were all kind of abiding together in a very harmonious way. Abide has four meanings: abide in physical posture, abide in teaching the doctrine, abide in samadhi or meditative stabilization, and abide in correctly residing within. This is a case of abiding in a physical posture. I couldn't find any commentary on those four meanings of abiding. I don't know what that last one, abide and correctly residing within. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I think the other ones are pretty self-explanatory. But here they're all abiding in this proper physical posture to listen to the sutra, to kind of be attentive to what the Avalokiteshvara and Shariputra are going to say. And then, of course, the Buddha at the very end of that. So that's a common prologue. Let's go ahead and do a share of the slides, and then we'll go through and see um, what's said in these, and also then see if there are any questions. So the four excellences are taught as part of this common prologue. I kind of touched on them each, with each of them. I didn't mention the excellent teacher, which is a second one, but excellent time is referred to in that part where we saw the commentary about at one time did I hear these words and so on. That's what is said in I think in ours it says, "Thus did I hear at one time." Actually, I should have had that in here. I don't know why I put that in there. That's from our commentary, I guess. It said, "Thus did I hear it." Oh, that's not even from our commentary. I'm not sure where I got that from. Anyway, we talked a little bit about time. I don't know that I need to say a whole lot more about the time when this occurred. This Asanga again, or Vajrapani, whoever it was that was the compiler, it's making sure that we know that they were there, they said this, and so on. I think I may have one slide that shares a little bit more about that. But excellent teacher was the Bhagawan. That we have, the Buddha there, and the Buddha is going to, through the power of his blessing, give rise to the speech, the dialogue that occurs between Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara. So the Bhagawan is kind of the teacher behind all of it. The excellent place, which is this, superior place that is pure, this massive vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, and then an excellent retinue, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. Now it's interesting, in His Holiness's book, the essence of the Heart Sutra, these last three are called the perfect conditions, and he doesn't really talk about the time so much. So anyway, this is just something to note. There are some texts that add even a fifth one, and we'll get to that in a moment, kind of in terms of the excellent subject matter, which is what the actual sutra itself presents after having done this prologue. So, excellent time, these words refers to the sutra that is about to, whoops, how did I do that again? Okay, these words, let me get this over here. Refers to the sutra that is about to be recited. So again, we don't have these words in our version of it, but we can say that just by saying, "Thus did I hear," we are kind of establishing that there are words that were heard at that particular time. This, by the way, is from this little book that is available. I sent out the link to it with the last email to Maria. You can find it at the Happy Monks publication website that Venerable Fedor has, a text called "The Sun Illuminating the Profound Meaning of the Heart Sutra" by this author who, Chune Drakpa Shedrup. Okay. So he kind of divides that up and says, this is what it's saying in terms of that time. So this is the sutra that's about to be recited. I heard shows that the teaching was personally listened to, and that one did not hear it via a third person. So this isn't Ananda or Vajrapani having heard it from someone else. Thus, I heard. I mean, I was actually there. Ananda says, rather than someone else having said these words to him. At one time is an interesting comment here. It shows that while the Arhat reciting it had heard other teachings several times, this teaching he had heard only once. That is, it is difficult to receive this teaching. It also indicates sharp wisdom, since the teaching was given only once. So this is the idea that, again, there's if it's a Sangha who is here, why do I say a Sangha? I keep saying a Sangha. Ananda. If it was Ananda who was hearing it, he's an Arhat, and he, is only hearing it for this one time. He may have heard other teachings and following the Buddha around, because Ananda was his great scribe who, was there present at so many of the Buddha's teachings. So he may have heard different teachings, but this is at one time, only heard once in terms of this particular sutra. And also, it indicates some sharp wisdom, because the teaching was given only once. So it was like, you get it now or you don't get it kind of thing. So I found those comments kind of interesting, so I thought I'd share those as well. Whoops, how did that get in here? I don't think that's right yet. Yeah, I've got that in the wrong place. Sorry about that. Let me go back to, yeah, I'll have to move that slide around. Excellent retinue. This is the fourth point. Again, I didn't really have much more to say on the excellent teacher or the excellent place because not so important. Excellent retinue. The word bodhisattva, as we saw in our commentary, they looked at it from the Sanskrit. This is from the Tibetan, Jongchop Sempa. And again, I put the wily in the parentheses because had been putting just kind of the wily without the pronunciation. But anyway, Zhang and Chup, these two syllables together mean enlightenment or enlightened state. Essentially, they refer to the same things that we often talk about in regard to the word Sangye, which refers to a Buddha, that there's one syllable that has to do with the process of completely purifying all the faults, all the limitations, obscurations, and then the other that has to do with kind of perfecting, accomplishing, attaining all understanding, all good qualities and insights. So together, these two, Jangchup, refers to enlightenment. And then Sempa, um, the way it was set out, I think in the text that I was referring to, it showed that it Sem means mind, and then Pa kind of adds this sort of quality of it being a heroic mind. So we even saw that in regard to what we had on page 12, that these are kind of beings who have annihilated demons. They have, done all these amazing works, accomplished the welfare of transmigrators. So it's a very heroic mind that is intent upon enlightenment. This is how we would kind of uh, do the literal translation of that, and enlightenment entailing those complete purification and complete development, cultivation of all the qualities. But one more comment that comes from, I think I may have taken that from the Heart Sutra, Geshe Sonam Rinpoche's book. Uh, it says, a bodhisattva again and again takes to mind the welfare of living beings and has the heroic ability to overcome the interferences and any interferences and everything hostile. So this is kind of what we mean by a bodhisattva, with this path that we're practicing in the Mahayana. A great assembly. This is another comment that we saw. We looked at this word great, and we're going to look a little bit at what Geshe Sonam Rinpoche says about this, explaining a little bit better for us what's entailed in this idea of greatness that was alluded to in that little verse that we had on page 12. A great assembly refers to a large number, and in the case of the bodhisattvas mentioned, they are moreover endowed with 6 kinds of greatnesses. So let's look at each of these. Greatly generous in that they are willing to give away their body, possessions, and virtue. They gladly give to those in need and enjoy the immediate pleasure of having satisfied another's wishes, as well as the long-term benefits that result from generosity. So recall that generosity is the first of the paramitas, the first practice gone beyond that the bodhisattva engages in. It's accomplished in its more complete state, in a surpassing state when one is on the first ground after having had a direct realization of emptiness, emptiness for the first time. And then it becomes fully perfected in the state of Buddhahood, obviously. Nonetheless, generosity is one of these great characteristics that these bodhisattvas all possess in terms of how they are generous. They are greatly intelligent, being capable of comprehending the intricacies of conventional phenomena and of understanding the fundamental nature of things, which is their kind of ultimate nature. So again, here we've got an allusion once more to the two truths, that they are capable of comprehending, the intricacies of how conventional things exist, as well as, how fundamental things exist, and of course, knowing those completely, which occurs in its greatest state again when one attains Buddhahood. When one attains the omniscient state of Buddhahood, you no longer have any barriers to knowing all conventional phenomena as well as the emptiness of all things. They are also greatly powerful with the capacity to overcome everything inimical, which is everything that is uh, some sort of hindrance or obstacle that acts in a kind of interfering way. So they're able to overcome all of that through their power. We saw that in the verse 2, it was said great awareness and great power. So we call them greatly intelligent, greatly powerful. They are greatly engaged in Mahayana practices, um, and which consist of taking responsibility for others' well-being, in contrast to Hinayana practices, where the focus is limited to responsibility for oneself and one's own liberation. So we looked at these earlier in the first class, the Hinayana practitioners being, the hearers and the solitary realizers who are intent upon achieving individual liberation, which is a noble goal. Nothing wrong with that goal in terms of the Buddha taught it as a valid result that falls into, again, this definite goodness. One of the results of having a certainty of state so that one never has to experience suffering again. But the bodhisattvas are intent on the definite goodness of complete enlightenment and take responsibility for others' well-being. So therefore, they are greatly engaged in Mahayana practices. So they are greatly armored with patience and enthusiastic effort. When harmed, they do not think of retaliating, but instead feel even stronger compassion and the wish to ensure the happiness of the one who has harmed them. So again, this is patience and enthusiastic effort are also two of the six paramitas. And we often talk about armoring ourselves with this, meaning they use a lot of war analogies in some of the Buddhist talk because, again, it's part of our human culture. But here we're armoring ourselves, keeping ourselves from being harmed by having a mind that is very patient with regard to others. It's not going to retaliate and not going to harm others in any way because we have great compassion for them, especially if they're harming us, because we see how afflicted their minds are and how much they will suffer from that. And then the enthusiastic effort, the joyous enthusiasm that we bring to our practice that keeps us moving in that direction. And then the sixth one, they're great tamers of all destructive forces, able to kind of overcome everything, all these deceiving demons, as it says here, and so on. So it's kind of interesting. In the little verse that they have, it seems like the fourth one is missing. Great giving, great awareness, great power. They wear great armor and have tamed the deceiving demons. Therefore, they are called Mahasattvas. But nonetheless, the fifth one or the fourth one that we had must be kind of implicit in there somewhere. Uh, they are called Mahasattvas. Again, the word Maha is the same as in Mahayana. It is literally translated as the great vehicle. And so this is the great heroic being. So they've gone beyond just being a bodhisattva. They're a Mahasattva, this kind of imbued with all this. But nonetheless, all bodhisattvas would have these. But it's just another honorific that we're giving to the bodhisattvas because of their amazing qualities. And as I said, some add a fifth excellence. This was mentioned in Geshe Dakpa's commentary. He was the resident Geshe at Sichenling, where I'm here in San Francisco teaching the next week or so. And then he's been still helping out, though he did retire from being resident teacher. And he calls this the fifth excellence, the excellent subject, when we actually begin the body of the text, kind of the main teaching of the sutra, having gone through the prologue. And so the subject of this teaching is an excellent subject. And on one hand, I want to mention this little comment from His Holiness. On one hand, there's the explicit subject matter, which is the Buddha's teaching on emptiness, which we can say is the most excellent subject. Obviously, it's why we're studying this primarily is to really get a good grasp on the teachings on emptiness so that we can understand them more completely. On the other hand, though, there is the hidden subject matter, which relates to the stages of the path associated with the deepening levels of understanding of emptiness. So these are the 5 paths that are sort of taught a little bit indirectly in this text in terms of the mantra that we're going to go into, as well as if you do have your outline in front of you, this really colorful one that looks like that. It essentially just says the Heart to the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, and it's got little boxes with different colors in them with the prologue. We're going to see as we get into this body of the text, once we get to what Avalokiteshvara is answering to Shariputra, that there are different paths that are indicated in the right-hand margin. The paths of accumulation and preparation, seeing, meditation, and then eventually the path of no more learning, which is Buddhahood. We'll talk about those in a bit, either later today or tomorrow. But nonetheless, this is kind of the hidden subject matter. When we studied in Italy, we studied the Abhisamaya Lamkara that I mentioned just a while ago. It was in our text. Maitreya's ornament for clear realizations. That's a whole exposition on the hidden meaning of the Prajnaparamita Sutras. So there's kind of always within the Prajnaparamita Sutras the more explicit meaning, which is the realization of emptiness that the Buddha is trying to convey through the words that are being set out. But hidden within it are the stages of developing that wisdom of emptiness as one goes through these 5 paths, all the way to the 5th path where one attains the perfection of wisdom in the state of Buddhahood. So again, just know that that's kind of behind there. We're not going to go into extensive exploration of these 5 paths, but I will talk about them, and you do have a chart that goes with them that is also in the materials that you should have. So we'll get into that again, maybe not later today, but certainly next week. The Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, His Holiness continues, explicitly present the teachings of emptiness in great detail through enumeration of the various categories of phenomena, both impure, such as the 5 aggregates, and pure, such as the 4 Noble Truths. I found that kind of interesting because the 4 Noble Truths, I mean, it is pure in terms of the realization in the mind of a Buddha, but when we talk about them, we can say that 2 of the truths, are impure in terms of the samsara, and 2 would be pure in terms of the resultant state of nirvana that they are about and that they are, helping you to attain. But nonetheless, I think he's meaning kind of the truths as they are set out by an Arya being, by someone who has realized those truths. And then he continues, at the same time, these scriptures implicitly present the stages of the path to enlightenment in terms of progressive levels of insight into emptiness. So again, just reiterating what was just said in terms of the explicit meaning and the hidden meaning of the sutra. All right, so now we are into the unique or uncommon prologue, and we have 2 things that are going on here. We're going to see what the Bhagawan is saying, what the Buddha is saying, and then we're going to also see what the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara is saying. So in terms of the sutra, we've now kind of covered the prologue, both the common and the uncommon. Maybe before we do this, let's go ahead and see if there are any questions at this stage.
I did have a
Yeah,
question.
Jennifer, sure.
I missed it. Because it mentions monks, and monks in this case refers to arhats, I'm just curious why they're there if they're not associated with the Mahayana and the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras.
Yeah, this term hearer that we often use to refer to most of the practitioners of the Hinayana, Shravaka, because we have to talk about the hearers, the Shravakas, and then the solitary realizers, the Pratyeka Buddhas. The hearers, they're called that because they actually do listen to the Mahayana Dharma. They actually, are happy to hear it. They just don't think that it's intended for them in terms of their individual practice. They take delight in hearing it and being in the retinue of the Buddha and so on, but they don't necessarily aspire to that goal. And then you have the solitary realizers. They probably wouldn't be there because solitary realizers don't become arhats in congregation. That's why they're called solitary. So they make these strong prayers that they be reborn into a land where there are no Buddhas, where there's no others practicing, so they can attain their arhatship in that life in a realm where there are no other beings teaching the Dharma. And it is interesting. His Holiness says they must have some kind of compassion for others because they also aspire then to teach on the basis of having achieved that in that world. But they exit from that world and exit into their solitary peace, and then are eventually stirred from that and have to accomplish the Mahayana. Now, again, on their learning path, would they listen to the Mahayana teachings? I'm not so sure. I don't recall anything alluding to that, but the hearers are definitely there, and the arhats, I mean, it doesn't seem like an arhat needs to learn much more in terms of the wisdom realizing emptiness, but maybe it's, again, they have some interest in it. They are happy to hear it, to listen to it. They just don't see it as what they need to practice. But maybe being in the retinue of the Buddha at that time, they could still gain some inspiration to enter the Mahayana and then continue on their progress through the Bodhisattva path. So again, the hearers and solitary realizers, they do have their own 5 paths, the same ones that we just talked about. And when they get to their path of no more learning, it's not absolute no more learning, because their no more learning is only in terms of the wisdom they needed to realize and the minimal amount of merit that they needed to collect in order to achieve their goal. they still will have to come into the Mahayana and go through the 5 paths of the Mahayana, but they won't need to regenerate the wisdom realizing emptiness and remove the afflictions because they've already done that. They're arhats. Instead, they will need to accumulate the merit mostly through cultivating bodhicitta and through engaging in the bodhisattva deeds and practices so that they can eventually remove the knowledge obscurations, the deeper obscurations that keep one from being enlightened. So we'll talk about those more when we get into that chart. I do want to spend some time looking at that chart, but this may take more than 6 sessions to get through in the end, depending on how much I talk. But nonetheless, it's a good question. Yeah. Any other comments, questions? All right, let's go to the text then to look at the unique prologue, because we didn't go through that. I kind of touched on a little bit in terms of bodhisattva and what have you. The unique prologue section says, at that time, the transcendent victor was absorbed in a samadhi on the categories of phenomena called perception of the profound. Again, this is Donald Lopez's translation of the Heart Sutra. Also at that time, the bodhisattva, the mahasattva, the superior Avalokiteshvara was contemplating the meaning of the profound perfection of wisdom and saw that those 5 aggregates also are empty of inherent existence. So the difference between the common and the unique prologue is, again, the common is shared with other sutras, whereas the unique prologue is found in this sutra and not in others. So at that time means at that time of teaching the doctrine, when the roots of virtue of the audience had ripened. So it's kind of at that time when everything had ripened for that particular teaching to occur, this is what was going on. That the Buddha Bhagawan was in this particular state, and the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara was in another state. So regarding the profound, of the perception of the profound that the Bhagawan was engaged in, it is clear it is that which is difficult to appear to the mind. It's called profound emptiness because it's not easy to perceive that. For example, it is not difficult to perceive the reflection of sun or moon in a lake, but it is difficult for the limits of space to appear on the surface of the lake. So we can't, if you're out on a lake at night and you can see the reflection of the moon or some stars, but you can't see the entire sky. And the entire sky cannot possibly be reflected and be seen by that person. Nonetheless, we can say the entire sky is reflected there, but we're limited in what we can see. So this is just saying it's difficult, it's profound to actually be able to perceive the emptiness of all phenomena. Perception means the wisdom that understands something so profound. So the categories of phenomena are the aggregates, constituents, sources, and so forth. We'll get into these. I don't want to go into them right at this moment. Many of you might have heard some of these terms, certainly aggregates, most of you are familiar with, but we will get into the constituents or elements, the sources, all of these. These are set out in when we get into the no eye, no ear, no nose, all of those sorts of things in the Heart Sutra. So the Buddha himself is having this kind of meditation that is the perception of the profound, kind of looking at all of the categories of phenomena, everything that exists through the lens of emptiness. Now, when we talk about the Buddha realizing this, I mean, it's kind of interesting because the Buddha is a fully perfected being and never is parted from the wisdom realizing emptiness. And at the same time is also knowing all conventional phenomena. So it's not like the Buddha is solely meditating on emptiness and is oblivious to everything else. The Buddha has an omniscient mind and is showing the aspect of meditating on emptiness, of kind of having that profound appearance. But the Buddha has the profound appearance at all times. This is what the state of Buddhahood means, is that you're never parted from the wisdom that realizes the two truths all the time. And it's not like the Buddha has to turn their attention. Buddha doesn't have to turn their attention to some phenomenon to know it. They're knowing all phenomena at all time, which again is pretty difficult for us to realize how that's possible. But this is the goal because our minds have that potential. Every one of our minds have that potential. So then we get into this also at that time is a term of emphasis meaning at that very time at which the disciples continue were ripe. So again, it's the Buddha from this place of this meditation who is going to then provide the blessings for all of this to take place. So the Buddha is perceiving that it's time for the sutra to be taught. And that's why everything else follows in terms of the dialogue that occurs between Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara. But he's pointing out here that at that time, the superior Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, he who has risen far above the level of common beings, who has the power to free from suffering all sentient beings who can be seen by his eyes. That's kind of the literal translation of that. He who sees with many eyes the suffering of the world, Avalokiteshvara. He is engaged in a similar meditation. He is also kind of in this contemplating the meaning of the profound perfection of wisdom. So he's observing emptiness, and observing it means contemplating on it, being able to know it directly. And then the word also in the phrase, because it says he saw these five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature, means that he saw not only the aggregates, but also the other categories of phenomena, the sources, the constituents, all the other things that we can talk about as being empty of inherent existence. This last little comment has to do with the Tibetan. I don't know enough Tibetan to talk about that, so I'm not sure that we need to even say that. But so this is kind of setting the stage for what's going on in a unique way. So the common prologue says, here we are on Vulture's Peak at this particular time when this is taking place, and we have the Buddha there, and we have this retinue of all this great assembly of monks and bodhisattvas, and then particularly we have these two beings who are both in meditative equipoise on emptiness. And Avalokiteshvara is coming to understand the emptiness of all phenomena. It is said that if you know the emptiness of one thing, you know the emptiness of all. Because if you truly realize that emptiness, then you should be able to apply it to any phenomenon. It's not something that is, needs to be known newly when it comes to any particular phenomenon, because they're all of one taste in emptiness. So again, this is sort of setting the stage. Now again, the same goes for Avalokiteshvara. As I mentioned, he too was one of the 8 bodhisattvas in the retinue of the Buddha when he lived. Not that there were only 8, but these were 8 special bodhisattvas that kind of exemplified the bodhisattva path. Samantabhadra was another one. You know his name probably from the aspiration of Samantabhadra, the king of prayers. So these 8 exemplified the bodhisattva way, but they were simply manifesting, Buddha's manifesting in that way to show what it's like to be a perfect practitioner of the Mahayana. So Avalokiteshvara too also already had perfect wisdom. He's already a fully enlightened being, appearing as this Buddha, or this bodhisattva, in the retinue of the Buddha. So there are those sorts of discussions that go on in some of the texts in terms of, although Avalokiteshvara ends up setting out all these things and all these ways of looking at phenomena as lacking inherent existence, he already was a fully enlightened being. It's solely for the Buddha inspiring him, blessing him to be able to give that instruction. All right, so now we're actually getting into the sutra. So we've gone through the prologue. Again, if you go to your little colored sheet that's got the different sections, there's a little blue box that pertains to the first part of this outline, which is how Shariputra asked his question. And then we have a green box, which is how Avalokiteshvara answered. This is the second part of the actual sutra. And then the third and last part is how that was admired by the teacher, how the Buddha admired the teaching that had been given by Avalokiteshvara. So we're now at the top of page 13. And we're looking at this first part. And again, in the sutra, it says, then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? So there's not very much written on this in terms of the text that we have in front of us, but there's a little bit that we should go through, a couple of paragraphs. This isn't the bulk of the text, obviously. It's a very small section. So, as it says there, the first is from, then by the power of the Buddha to who wishes to practice a profound perfection of wisdom. The word then, that is there right at the beginning, then, means after Avalokiteshvara had been empowered by the Tathagata to fully understand the meaning of what was to be explained. So again, it's not that he needed that empowerment, but it was just exemplified in this, that all of a sudden the Buddha is empowering him, and he's arising then from his meditation is going to reply to Shariputra. But Shariputra, of course, has to put the question out to him first. when it says venerable there, it says the Venerable Shariputra. Venerable is a term which is generally famous for addressing those who are kind of junior to oneself. So if you are a monk or something, you would say to someone venerable, but it's usually not used as for someone who's superior to you. You would use a greater honorific, I guess. But it says, but if this term is a term that occurs in the context of the compilation of the word of the Buddha, it is not correct that Shariputra was junior in training to the compiler Ananda. Therefore, because this is Ananda talking about Shariputra, so he wouldn't be giving the title venerable to him because Shariputra was not junior to him. Shariputra was superior to him. He was already an arhat. He was already a realized being, and Ananda had not yet attained arhatship. So, therefore, it says, it is spoken with the special meaning of one endowed with a life that has abandoned the afflictions and that is free from birth and death by actions and afflictions. In essence, that's referring to an arhat again, that he's using the term venerable because he's venerating Shariputra by virtue of his realization. So it's a little strange in that regard, I guess, in a real technical way, but nonetheless, there's an explanation for it. They can say that, yes, this is still some way of paying homage to Shariputra because he has done that task of abandoning the afflictions, is no longer bound up in birth and death through the force of his karma and delusions. Regarding the name Shariputra, a child who was an emanation of the Bodhisattva, Savana Varana Viskamben. This is one of the 8 Bodhisattvas as well. It's the one I can never remember the name of because it's just too long for me. This seems to be an emanation of a Bodhisattva who was born, or who was actually a Buddha. It gets quite complicated when you start adding on all these layers. Who was born from the union of his mother, Sharika, who had eyes like a sharika bird that lives in the reed or Nalandra forests, and his father, Tishya. His name taken from his father was Upatishya, and his name taken from his mother was Shariputra. Putra means son, and so it's son of Shari, son of Sharika. Because he was of the Sharadvati family, he is also called Sharadvati Putra. Remember, we see that at the very end. We don't see it so much, or no, I'm sorry, it's when Avalokiteshvara replies back to him, and then I think it is also at the very end. But usually it's been just referred to as Shariputra, but his full name would be Sharadvati Putra, which is son and daughter, which is the son of Sharadvati, whatever, because of the whole full family name, the Sharadvati. Then son and daughter of good lineage means those who have the Mahayana lineage. Now again, we all have Buddha lineage or Buddha nature. This is not to be debated. I mean, we all have the potential to attain Buddhahood, but do we all have Mahayana lineage? It doesn't seem that everyone has Mahayana lineage because it has to be awakened through the force of great compassion. And so there are those, like the hearers and the solitary realizers, who have kind of a hearer lineage or a solitary realizer lineage. They kind of awaken into their own lineage, but they don't yet have the awakening of their Mahayana lineage. So by Mahayana lineage here, we mean someone who has awakened great compassion within themselves. So that acts as a basis for the generation of bodhicitta. Great compassion being the quality of compassion that is intent upon helping beings to be free from their suffering, not just having that wish that they not suffer, but taking that active role in overcoming their suffering. So those who have this good lineage that are being addressed in this sutra, that Shariputra is saying, how should a person in that lineage practice? What is it that they should be doing? We're talking about those who have awakened their great compassion, who then are kind of destined to enter into the Mahayana and generate bodhicitta as a way of actually becoming a bodhisattva. One has to have an uncontrived bodhicitta developed in their mind in order to become a bodhisattva. Nonetheless, at this stage, just having an activation of your Mahayana lineage through great compassion makes you a suitable vessel for listening to these teachings. So then he says the purpose of saying son and daughter, and again, we don't have son and daughter in ours. This is said in ours, it just says son of the lineage. I guess there are some translations that do have son or daughter at that point. And there's kind of a point to that. If sometimes it's said that when it just says son of the lineage, it is referring to the fact that there are those who tend to think that there's some precedence and preference to the male gender, and that males are capable of achieving realizations that females aren't. And obviously, in this language, and the language especially that Avalokiteshvara sets out, he's equating the two and saying, no, it's a son of lineage or daughter lineage. So in our sutra that we've been reading, it starts off with son, somewhat from that point of view, and then when Avalokiteshvara says any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage, he's intending to say that anyone is equal in regard to if they are men, if they are women, they can achieve the same realizations. Nonetheless, there's another meaning to it in that when they spell out kind of a man and a woman, a son and a daughter, there's a purpose. And it says there in our text, the purpose of saying son and daughter is that only those who are male or female can create all the good qualities of the path and the realizations. That beings such as eunuchs and impotent people, they even use, often in many texts, talk about hermaphrodites. And this could get into a huge discussion that I'm not sure we want to get into, but essentially what they say is people who don't have kind of a real kind of set gender uh, often lack some power or ability to be able to generate some of the realizations. Not that they can't study the Dharma, not that they can't achieve something on their path, but whether they can actually become a suitable basis for generating these deeper realizations seems to be called in question, that there's lacking some stability in terms of that. And I, again, don't know what quite to think about that, but I just have to kind of give the words that are set out here. So, therefore it is said in order to exclude them. So this is the purpose when it said son and daughter in both places, is just to say it's a son, somebody who's definite in being male gender, somebody who's definite in being female gender. If you have these other things that might be confusing for people or whatever in some way, that they don't have the power and the ability to do that. And I don't know if I completely agree with it myself, but nonetheless, this is what's said in the text. Um, then it says whosoever. Again, we don't really have this in our translation. It just says any, I guess, any son of the lineage. So whosoever means distinctions are not made. That is, anyone who does not fear emptiness and has interest is suitable. So I like to take that last part as more or less like, again, anyone can study this text. Anyone can kind of engage in the study of emptiness as long as they don't have some kind of trepidation around the subject and has interest in it. They're all suitable to receive these. Nonetheless, you know, there are some specific things that are being set out by virtue of just Shariputra's question in terms of having someone of good lineage, someone of the Mahayana lineage, having someone who's more definite in their gender as a man or a woman, and so on. But anyway, anyone who has that interest certainly can engage in these teachings. With respect to the question, how should one train who wishes to practice the profound? Our author says that which is the profound practice of the perfection of wisdom is the practice of the meaning of the perfection of wisdom. He asks how those who wish to act, that is, who wish to practice, should practice. The occurrence of the phrase, this gets into, again, the Tibetan. I'm just going to skip over that because I don't really know much about the Tibetan, and it wasn't really explained in my the commentaries that I went to. But nonetheless, we can say that there are some things, I'm going to go to a slide in a minute, that are spelled out in this whole question in terms of who is practicing, what are they practicing, how shall they practice it. Vimala Mitra, I'll skip down to that part, says in his vast commentary, in some edition it says those who wish to practice. This means that there is no difference between do and achieve. The master Prashastra Sena says in his commentary, the practitioner is the person, the bodhisattva. The practice is the doctrine, the perfection of wisdom. So again, there's a lot of words in there, but I'm not sure that there's many things that are that essential to our understanding the meaning of this. Let's just go to this. So here again was three outlines that we'll be looking at in terms of the actual sutra. We're in this first part. This is what Geshe Tenzin Temple, who I studied with a little bit over in Italy. He's at Instituto Lama Tsongkhapa, and he helps with the master's program now over there. He says the question, how should one train who wishes to practice the profound, what we just looked at in that last paragraph, sets out the three. That which is to be practiced, which is, of course, the perfection of wisdom. The practitioner who practices it is implied by this. It says, how should one, having set out the qualifications earlier in terms of all the things we just talked about. How should that practitioner who who wants to practice it, how should they then practice it? How is it to be practiced? Which again is the aim of the question, is to kind of give a chance for Avalokiteshvara to expound upon the techniques for one who wishes to practice, how they will practice the profound perfection of wisdom. So I don't know, I think that was the only thing I shared on that. Maybe I'll hold on to this and I'll stop the share here. We'll go into that in the next class at about 10:15. So let's go ahead and start the how Avalokiteshvara answered, because we don't quite get into the paths yet. There's a paragraph where the Avalokiteshvara begins his answer, and then he goes into the whole thing, form is empty, emptiness is form. All right, so let's look at, we'll do questions in a little while after we go through this first part here. It says, regarding the second, I'm on page 13, section 2 there. Regarding the second, how Avalokiteshvara answered, the short answer is from Avalokiteshvara said this, all the way through, should view things in this way. So it's that this is the short answer, this very first paragraph in that little green box on your colored outline that you have. And that goes to, they should correctly view these five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature, right? So, okay, so that's fine, that first box. The extensive answer that Avalokiteshvara gave is from form is emptiness all the way up to when the Buddha says, well done, well said, well said. So we see that that kind of goes on, for quite some time. And actually, it's interesting. They do say that the way it's set out is intended for people of different faculty, that this whole kind of longer explanation that we're going to go through, that is really not that long, that Avalokiteshvara gives, is for those perhaps have lesser faculty. The mantra that we recite when we recite it is actually for those of extremely sharp faculty. All they need is the mantra and they get it immediately. Obviously, most of us are not in that category, or we wouldn't be studying this text. So then because the individual words are easy to understand, he says, they do not need to be explained. The word also in those five aggregates also indicates that not only is the I empty of inherent existence, but the mind also is empty of inherent existence. Thus it indicates the stages of understanding the two selflessnesses of persons and phenomena. So let's pause there and go to the text. Just want to point out where this is again. So let me read the words that are in that part of the sutra. He said that, this is talking about Shariputra said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, Arya, again, the word Arya means someone who has directly realized emptiness, kind of evident by this. A Mahasattva, other than having those six greatnesses, also generally indicates a Bodhisattva on one of the 10 grounds, which means that they have definitely realized emptiness directly, because that's where the first ground starts, is with that direct realization of emptiness. The other 10 grounds proceed through the path of meditation. So the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharadvati Putra, Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage, which, as I said, emphasizes that it's both men and women who have this aspiration, who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom, should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. So the five aggregates, again, I'll put a slide up in a minute on them, but essentially when it's saying also, the five aggregates are the basis for the person. They are the things that constitute the mind and body of the person. And prior to having realized those phenomena as empty of inherent existence, a practitioner generally realizes that the self that is imputed on those five aggregates, the person that is imputed on those five aggregates, is empty of inherent nature. So the word also in this context, we saw it earlier, right? The Avalokiteshvara in his meditation saw that the five aggregates were also empty of inherent nature, and there it was about seeing as all the other phenomena as well as the five aggregates are empty. Here it's the idea that having the instruction that we take away is that you first realize the emptiness of the self of persons, so that then you can realize the emptiness of the basis of the person and all other phenomena as well. Um, and nonetheless, they do say that the conception of inherent existence arises in the opposite way, because we first see something, for example, the form of a person, and then we think that that form is inherently existent, and then we impute the person on it and think that it's inherently existent. But nonetheless, when you disentangle yourself from this web of misconceptions, the first thing you realize is the selflessness of the person. You have to come to understand that people, you yourself in particular, do not exist inherently. And so you yourself are a label. When you talk about conventional existence, you are labeled, merely designated to this collection of stuff, what we call the five aggregates. So let me go to the slides and just go through those five in case you're not familiar with them. I'm going to skip again this slide and go into that next time when I have a little more time. The five aggregates that we saw, and we see them in our sutra as well, because first Avalokiteshvara talks about form, because it's the most evident of the five aggregates, perhaps, because we're all embodied beings. So form is the only physical one of these five, and it is essentially equivalent to our body. Then feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are all mental. Now, some of you may have studied minds and mental factors, but essentially the Buddha, when he talked about the basis for a being, decided to pull these two, feeling and discrimination, out of the whole set of what's usually described as 51 different mental factors. Not that that's exhaustive of what goes on in our mind, but there are 51 that play a very important role in terms of our understanding the problems that we have in our minds, the delusions, the mistaken ideas, as well as the ones that can be very virtuous and useful, as well as other ones that just play a more utilitarian function in knowing. These two, feeling and discrimination, they're quite utilitarian in a sense because we do have them all the time. We're always having some sort of feeling tone going on, always having some experience of something pleasant, something unpleasant, or something that is neutral. These three types of feeling tones that can be generated. The problem is we react to those feelings in ways that are not healthy generally. We get attached to the pleasant feelings and we push away the unpleasant feelings, and we just kind of zone out in regard to the neutral feelings. We don't kind of further our own ignorance. So we create attachment, aversion or anger and ignorance. They get furthered by the type of feeling tone that we have, because we're not able to just be with the feeling. We instead have a whole process that goes on, a thought process that causes the afflictions to be generated. So the Buddha set out feeling as a separate aggregate because he was wanting to emphasize the important role that it plays in terms of drawing us into that process. Look at our own lives in terms of when we have something really pleasant, how quickly the mind goes to attachment when it experiences that. Or something that is unpleasant comes into your sphere of experience, how quickly the mind gets agitated and angry. This third one on our list, that's the second of the mental ones, is a mental factor called discrimination that's also with us all the time. It's an omnipresent mental factor. And what it's doing is it's saying, this is this and this is that. It's not giving a whole label to it. It's just able to differentiate, able to discriminate between one thing and another. So this often is something that contributes to views that we have. We kind of start parsing things up, and then we think we like this and we don't like that, and this is good and that is bad, and all this kind of dualistic stuff happens on a lot of the basis of discrimination, and views get held that we hold to really tightly that can be very erroneous, but nonetheless our discrimination kind of feeds that process by being able to differentiate one thing from another. And that's all that this factor is doing, is discriminating this from that. But we have a whole process that follows, just like with feeling. We have a whole process that follows after the feeling occurs. So those two are set out because the Buddha felt that there was a need to emphasize them. They often say that lay people are mostly caught up in the feeling thing and that whole process, whereas the ordained people who are investigating philosophy and what have you can get caught up in discrimination and their own views. But I think we are, caught up in both of them. They both play a pretty major role in terms of our suffering and the creation of our delusions. Compositional factors includes the bucket of all of the other mental factors. This includes, as I said, the non-virtuous mental factors that we have, the afflictions and so on. It includes our ignorance, obviously. It includes different views. It includes the positive, virtuous states of mind, such as faith and non-harmfulness and so on. It includes other utilitarian type functions that we do have in our minds. It includes the changeable mental factors. Anyway, if you do that type of study of minds and mental factors, you can go into all of those. It's another basic program course. Then finally, and actually I do have a whole set of videos on the same YouTube page that go into all of that. It's quite a few of them that goes through a text on minds and mental factors. I think there's a few videos missing, but the audio files are also out there on archive.org. But anyway, that's just for your information if you want to pursue that later. The fifth of these aggregates, the final one that's mental, is kind of the larger composite of what we call consciousness. Consciousness meaning essentially any of the five sense consciousnesses as well as the mental consciousness. The mental consciousness is where we spend most of our time, perhaps with all of our thinking and what have you, but the doors of the five sense consciousnesses are what allow us to know all the objects in our world around us. So this is that larger sphere in which all of this is happening. All these different mental factors are playing out in regard to the sphere of consciousness that can manifest in a mental way that is primarily for us conceptual mind, or the five sense consciousnesses, which are all our perceptual mind that allows us to perceive various phenomena. So these five aggregates are the basis for the person. In terms of you yourself have your own physical aggregate, which is the first one, form, and then you have your mental aggregates, which are feeling, discrimination, all these compositional factors, consciousness. All of that is the basis for a person. Now, there are some beings who abide in what's called the formless realm, and according to the tantric teachings, they always have some real subtle form with them, but they don't have gross form at all. So we would say in sutra teaching that they don't have the first aggregate, but essentially all beings have all five of these aggregates. And so this was a schema that the Buddha used to have us analyze the basis for a person versus the person themselves. And so when we go through this and start getting into this, and the very first one that Master Avalokiteshvara chooses to talk about, this first one is form. So he says the first aggregate, form, it's empty. Emptiness is form, and so on. And then he could continue and just say feeling is empty. Emptiness is feeling. Emptiness is not other than feeling. Feeling is not other than emptiness. So as we get into the text, we'll see that all of these are looked at to some degree. They're just not looked at in quite precise way as the first one is, in a more extensive way. Okay, so let's see if there's any questions, because it's only about 2 minutes till we end, and then when we return, we'll kind of pick up at this point where because I didn't quite get into, I did talk about the two selflessnesses before, so you should be somewhat familiar with those, but we'll kind of review that, and then we'll get into what it means to be empty of inherent existence. Talk about that a little bit before we go on to the rest of what Avalokiteshvara says. Any questions? I know it was a lot of words today. I feel like I've been talking nonstop for almost an hour and a half, but so again, these will be out on YouTube shortly. I'll try to get that out there later today if I can, and you can review that if you need to. I would encourage you to continue to recite the Heart Sutra on a regular basis. I always encourage people too, I mean, I haven't said it yet, but to memorize the Heart Sutra. I started reciting the Heart Sutra many years ago. It was not quite the exact same version as this. I think it was translated by Venerable George, but it was an earlier one that they had in Italy. And so there's some words that are a little bit different, but I recite it every day. And if you recite it every day, it's not that long. You get it memorized in a fairly short period of time. But then you can always bring it to mind. You can always kind of review it in your own head. You might begin, incorporating some meditation on emptiness into your practice if you don't do that already. We haven't gotten into the words that expound upon this, but I think it's useful certainly to do that. Uh, all right, so I think that that's it for today. Let's go ahead and do some dedication. So we can dedicate that through the force of the merit that we've created today and examining this topic and exploring the Heart Sutra. May we become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. May we be able to bring them to enlightenment quickly through our study and practice of this profound sutra. Also, may the mind of bodhicitta that has not developed grow within our own hearts and the hearts of others, and may that which has developed continue to increase. And then also dedicate for the good health and long lives of our precious teachers, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Kyabje Zopa Rinpoche, our spiritual director, all the other teachers that we and others have a karmic connection with that we benefit from. May we and others never be parted from perfect guides in all our lifetimes. And then finally, just dedicate for whoever else you might be holding in your heart so that they might benefit from the teachings that we've looked at today, our own positive energy that we've created. We can even send it out to them, think that it becomes the cause to relieve their suffering and to bring them to perfect happiness. And through what we've done here today, may all beings find true peace and happiness. Okay, thank you all so much.